Quick stories. While walking the dog, I had a bad feeling about my father. He has heart problems and is prone to heart attacks. I called him several times, but he didn't answer. Then I rushed back home and saw him lying near the sofa. All signs indicated that he was having a heart attack. I called an ambulance, and while it was driving, I gave him first aid. When the doctors arrived, they told me that if I had returned home even a minute later, he would have died.
Quick stories. A few years ago, my friends and I went clubbing. We went into one bar, and as soon as I crossed the threshold, I was overcome by a feeling of horror. Every cell in my body told me, "Get out of there." After about 20 minutes, I convinced my friends that something was really wrong, and we went home. The next day I saw this club on the news on TV. There was a shootout on the street next to the club. The instigators were inside while we were there.
Quick stories. When I was 6 years old, my dad and I had an argument, and I wrote my very specific, very rare name on the side of his brand new car with a rock. When he asked me who did it, I categorically denied that it was me. My level of acting can be compared to Meryl Streep in Sophie's Choice. I should have been given a damn Oscar. Then he laughed and said, "Are you saying that someone else came to my car and scribbled your name on it?" I denied everything all day, and my father, admittedly, chuckled to himself. I couldn't understand what was funny about this. Of course, later he was going to skin me alive and drag me around the city on a cold evening. He said he couldn't stop laughing because my lie was so ridiculous, but I stuck to it so resolutely that it was one of the funniest situations of his life. He knew that he should punish me, but it was so amazing that he couldn't bring himself to get angry. I'm almost 36. Now every time he buys a new car, before he shows it to me, he says, "You're never mad at me, are you? I think I deserve it."
Quick stories. I worked for a bank and would talk and play around with the ID guy when he would come in. We would email and go to lunch sometimes, but he had a girlfriend and I was dating around. My mom came to see me one day and my coworker was talking to my mom and said, "You see that guy who just walked in? He is going to be your son-in-law one day." My mom asked me about it and I laughed. 19 years later, we have been married for almost 16 years and have 2 kids.
Quick stories. I was 30 and got fired from my job for drinking in my office. I was 50 pounds overweight. My wife was threatening to leave and I had a 2-year-old little boy. I decided that going to a rehab was the best option for me. After a while, I became a volunteer counselor at the rehab. I have almost 4 years sober now, and I attend all meetings about once a week. The fellowship there is really awesome, and the support I get from people who understand exactly what I went through and am going through is invaluable. I have lost 30 pounds by doing simple workouts at home, not eating crap food, and trying to eat smaller, healthier meals throughout the day. My son is now almost 6, and we play soccer in the backyard and cuddle as I read to him most nights. My wife and I will celebrate our 12th anniversary Sunday. The key for me was finding a group of people who understood me and could help me because they had been through it. I went to counseling for a little while, but honestly didn't find it to be as helpful as other things. I couldn't get past the fact that I was paying the counselor to listen to me, and that if I stopped paying her, she would stop seeing me. I had a bunch of people who would listen to me and allow me to share their lives without a monetary gain for them.
Quick stories. Do you have someone in your life that you think you'll end up with romantically one day, just not anytime soon? What's the story?
Not a man, but my friend's grandmother went through this. They're in their late 90s now. She was engaged in her late teens and he went to fight in Wii. And when he came back, he had a lot of what was clearly PTSD going on and told her he couldn't marry her. They were both heartbroken, but both went on to marry other people. And she moved out of province and raised her family elsewhere. Growing up, my friend said she always knew about the ex-fiancé and the sad story of her grandmother's first love and broken heart. When we were about 13, her grandfather died, and 3 to 4 years later, her grandmother went back to visit with friends and cousins in her small hometown. She literally bumped into her former fiancé on the main street, and they went and had a coffee and found out his wife had also died a few years prior. They both confessed that they had never stopped thinking about what could have been and got married the next month, both in their early 80s. They've been married 15 years this year, and they're hopelessly in love.
Quick stories. Redditors with real-life butterfly effect stories. What happened and what was the series of events and outcomes?
About 20 years ago, I was watching a TV show about a guy in Australia who feeds the homeless. At the end, they interviewed a few of the homeless who all said he was great, and their names flashed up on the bottom of the screen. One of the guys had the same name as my brother, who I hadn't seen for about 15 years. I looked at the screen, squinted, and there under the dirt and grime was my brother, who was an addict and lost touch with us years ago. I called the TV program and got the name of the feeder guy. He contacted my brother and passed on my phone number. A couple of days later, I got a call and told him he could come live with me, and he did. He moved in at my place. Then the next morning went up the road to get a newspaper to look for a job. This was about 2000. Came back and he'd found someone advertising for English teachers in China. He asked me what I thought. I said, "What have you got to lose?" So off he went and loved it. Kept telling me to go too. So 6 months later, I quit my job, sold my car, moved everything I wanted to keep over to my older brother's place, and left for China. I was there for 18 years. I met a girl, got married, bought an apartment, had 2 kids. Then the Hong Kong troubles came and I moved back to Australia a few months ago. And it all started from watching a TV show and seeing a name I knew.
Quick stories. What was the fastest way you've seen someone ruin their life?
Couple of guys in my hometown were looking for something to steal so they could sell it to buy drugs. They come to a house where no one was supposed to be home, and one guy gets out of the car and goes to the house to steal a grill. A friend of the homeowner happened to be there and came out when he stepped onto the porch. He tells the friend that he is looking for his dog, so the guy walks out into the yard to help look for it. The would-be robber panics and pulls out a gun and shoots the man in the back of the head. At 21, he started a life sentence for a really stupid murder.
Quick stories. K-12 teachers of Reddit. What is a story of a student you had who went on to surprise you with how much they later succeeded or failed in life?
Not my story, but my grandma's. She was a middle school English teacher and had this one student who was problematic. He was well known as a troublemaker and a bully. My grandma was a pretty strict teacher, so she didn't take his crap. She had to take disciplinary actions on multiple occasions. So it's safe to say he was not a fan of her, but my grandma was always able to see his potential, and she didn't want him to waste his life. Flash forward about 35 or 40 years. This student got a hold of my grandma's email address and contacted her. In the email, he stated how he has had a very troubled life and had past problems with the law. He then said that he remembered back to her English class and how she was the only teacher who ever pushed him to be a better student and person. It ended up that those memories gave him motivation to turn his life around. He cleaned up his life and was able to get and hold a job. He wanted to thank my grandma for being the only person who ever believed in him and pushed him to be a better person. It definitely made my grandma happy to know that even if it was decades later, she was able to help give someone self-worth and a second chance at life.
Quick stories. Completionist gamers. What drives you and what is your real life situation like?
Am 31. I work 40 hours a week. Girlfriend but no kids. Those things alone mean that I have max 10 hours a week for gaming. My friends with kids now have 0. As a student, I would have gamed 30 hours a week easily, often much more. It means that I'm now really picky about games and judge them very quickly. I want to spend my limited gaming time well and know that I will be able to complete most of the game in a reasonable time frame. I used to love sandbox open world games. Now I just don't have the time. Bought GTA a couple of days ago, played it for 2 hours and decided to trade it in because it's just too much, too disjointed, too much to explore. I really love the more linear, narrative-driven games now. Last of Us was perfect for my needs, like picking up a book and continuing the story when I had an hour to spare and not worrying about grinding and leveling and all the stuff I used to enjoy. But now doing that stuff feels like a waste of time because I know it will take too long, and I hate knowing that I won't have time to get the most out of those games.
Quick stories. What's something you did out of spite where you came out as a loser but still felt like a winner because it was out of pure spite?
A mean girl in high school used to bully me. We were both in chorus, different classes. She was given a solo for the concert, and they offered it to me for our baccalaureate service. I'm Jewish and didn't want to go since it's a Christian religious ceremony, but if I didn't, the bully would have gone the solo in front of the bigger audience. So I went, sat through it, and sang the solo lolling in my head while she sang in the chorus.
Quick stories. What story completely touched you?
An elderly man was sitting alone on a dark path. He wasn't sure of which direction to go, and he'd forgotten both where he was traveling to and who he was. He remembered absolutely nothing. He suddenly looked up to see an elderly woman before him. She grinned toothlessly and with a cackle spoke, "Now your third wish. What will it be?" Third wish. The man was baffled. How can it be a third wish if I haven't had a first and second wish? You've had 2 wishes already, the hag said, but your second wish was for you to forget everything you know. She cackled at the poor man. So it is that you have 1 wish left. All right, he said hesitantly. I don't believe this, but there's no harm in trying. I wish to know who I truly am. Funny, said the old woman as she granted his wish and disappeared forever. That was your first wish.
Quick stories. When has a gut feeling saved your life?
I almost got kidnapped once. I was like 23 or so. I was walking down my street at a little after dusk. I saw a van approaching a little ahead. No lights on. Didn't think much of it due to the time of day. The van slowed down and almost started creeping as I was approaching this part of the sidewalk, which had a tall solid wall fence to a community. This gave me some pause in that quick moment. For me to keep walking, I'd have to go between the wall and the van. In the little time it took me to take a couple of steps, and as the van was getting close, I noticed that the side door was slowly sliding open. The one thought in my mind was, why isn't the light turning on inside the van? When you open the door of a vehicle, the light should come on inside it, unless you deliberately switch that off. And I just ran to the median. I ran in front of the van and across the street. Because if they're gonna have some use of roadkill me, have at it. But they're not getting me in one glorious piece. Immediately, the van took off like someone lit it on fire, from a slow crawl to full speed. As I looked after it to see the plates, I noticed it had no plates and still no lights. I called the police, of course. They sent cars out and didn't find the van. I never had anything like this happen again, and I'm just an ordinary person, so I don't suspect it was targeted. I was just in the wrong place at the wrong time.
Quick stories. When has a gut feeling saved your life?
Listen to my body twice. I started having painful period-like cramps, so I made an appointment with my OB-GYN the next day. They immediately gave me an ultrasound and discovered a grapefruit-sized tumor where my ovary should have been. Certain it was cancer. I was in surgery days later. Thankfully, all the cancer was encapsulated in the tumor, so no chemo was necessary. I did have to go on an estrogen patch though. A year later, I was sitting in my bathtub and reached out for a towel. Felt a weird pain in my left breast. I knew it was cancer. I immediately pulled off the estrogen patch and then went in for a mammogram first thing the next morning. A few days later, I was having a bilateral mastectomy and reconstruction, which I had insisted on because it was my second cancer diagnosis. The 2 cancers were unrelated. My doc wanted me to have a lumpectomy and radiation, but I insisted that I never again wanted to have to tell my daughters that I had cancer. After my surgery, my tumor was tested and it was determined to be highly recurrent and aggressive. Even though the cancer had not spread into my lymph nodes, I went through 20 rounds of harsh chemo in the hopes it will never ever come back. Thankful to say that on 20th April 2020, I will celebrate being cancer-free for 5 years.
Quick stories. When has a gut feeling saved your life?
Always hated the dad scout leader in my area growing up. Just seemed like a real creep. Hated seeing him at community events, soccer games, back to school nights, etc. 10-year-old me staged a hissy fit to end all meltdowns with me slamming doors, crying, and breaking shit to avoid being moved from Cub Scouts, where the moms ran things, to avoid Boy Scouts. Turns out the scout leader was molesting 3 or 4 of the boys in the troop and threatening to kill them if they ever spoke. Justice found him and he's in prison.
Quick stories. When has a gut feeling saved your life?
My husband is a state trooper and has always said the wreck that sticks with him the most was a group of 4 17 to 18-year-olds in a car speeding on the freeway. One of the kids was screaming and begging the driver to let him out. The driver pulled over and let him out as he and the other 2 passengers made fun of him for being a pussy and not wanting to have fun. A couple miles later, the driver flew off an overpass, went over the guardrail, and onto the freeway below, killing him and the other 2 passengers instantly and ejecting one out of the car. Luckily, there was no one below that they fell onto. My husband always remembers that kid who demanded to get out and how terrified and shaken he was when he walked up on what happened and was able to explain that he was in the car with them just minutes prior and would have been dead had he not been a pussy.
Quick stories. When has a gut feeling saved your life?
A great tip I always learned was to call a friend while in a cab/Uber and you are feeling unsafe. When your gut tells you the vibe is weird, just call any friend you know will pick up the phone and tell them, "Hey, I am almost at the house. I will be there in time left for drive, so see you soon." My niece who lived alone did this whenever she went to home late at night, and it just makes sure that you have someone looking out for you and that your cab driver/Uber driver has no choice but to deliver you home in said time or someone might get suspicious. I hope I made a little bit of sense.
Quick stories. When has a gut feeling saved your life?
About 10 years ago, I had a job that started at 6 a.m. on the weekends. I didn't drive and would take the light rail, which was a 15 minutes walk from the house I rented. One dark morning, I saw a person up ahead of me a few blocks away. I usually see homeless people on my walk to the light rail, and most are harmless, just trying to collect cans for the deposit or asking for change. But this guy just felt off. I could tell from blocks away that there was something wrong about him, so I crossed the street and grabbed my phone from my backpack because I still had to go to work, and this road was the only way to the light rail. Suddenly, I hear a bomb bomb bomb. I look over my shoulder and it was him with his hose in his hand. That sound was the sound of his shoes hitting the pavement as he ran towards me. I took off running, screamed, "I'm calling 911," and held my phone to my ear. He must have saw and took it seriously because he ran the opposite direction that I ran. I did call 911, but they wanted me to wait there for the cop, and I was like, fuck no. I said it was because I didn't want to be late for work, but I was terrified of him finding me. I will never forget the sound of his shoes hitting the pavement.
Quick stories. What is the funniest story you have ever read on Reddit?
My friend was sleeping over at my house. My parents and brother were all sleeping upstairs while we were downstairs watching TV, playing video games and shit. At around 1 a.m. he asks if this girl can come over. He really wants to get with this girl, and I don't want to turn him down, so I reluctantly agree on the condition that she's quiet. The 3 of us are hanging out, and I make some excuse to leave the room so my friend can have some alone time with this girl. I'm upstairs in my room when I start hearing loud moans. This is bad news for me, but great news for my friend. He's losing his virginity to a girl he really likes. I hear stirring in the next room, and I know that their bout of loud lovemaking has woken my parents. The last thing I want is for my confused father to walk in on my friend having sex in my basement. What do? I go to Pornhub, click on the first video I see, crank that shit to 100 on my speakers, and let it play for the 3 minutes that my buddy ended up lasting. My dad ended up coming into my room, discovering the source of the noise. I even threw in some fapping motion under the covers, and awkwardly leaving. My buddy ended up having the best time ever, bro, but Jesus, there were some awkward glances exchanged between my parents and I the next morning.
Quick stories. Redditors with real-life butterfly effect stories. What happened and what was the series of events and outcomes?
My mother wore heels to work and slipped on the carpeted steps, resulting in a broken high heel and a broken leg. While she was home recovering, she somehow developed allergies that led to her needing an inhaler Astrix. The inhaler Astrix interfered with her birth control, And now I have a brother 13 years younger than me.
Quick stories. Redditors with real-life butterfly effect stories. What happened and what was the series of events and outcomes?
That reminds me of what happened to me. First semester of college, I bumped into a girl in my hall and I recognized her from a massive BOA, Bands of America, competition 2 years ago. We became friends and she got me into a specific club. Well, that club hosted a party second semester and she convinced me to go because I hate parties. We get there and she runs into a dude she used to know from H's. That dude has a cute friend who I end up dating, and still am currently. And the only reason he was at that party is because only one of his friends had a connection to the club that would grant them access. And the only reason my current BF became friends with that kid is because he accidentally stumbled upon him and the rest of his future friend group when he wanted to smoke around campus and found them 1 year ago. So, without those friends who we happened to meet and who had each convinced us to go, we wouldn't have seen each other at all or ever met. He's a year older in schooling and we have vastly different majors. Pretty cool, right?
Quick stories. Reddit, what's the most heartbreaking story from your love life?
I met Stephanie at a party in 2004, and we were together for 7 years. It was perfect. She was the love of my life. I asked her to marry me, and she said yes. She was my best friend, my partner in crime, my teammate, my soulmate. We even had a dog. We were engaged only 3 months when Stephanie was murdered by an unstable person at her job at a mental health facility. Enter hell on earth. Now all I have left in my life is our dog, Dutch, the dog that probably saved my life.
Quick stories. Reddit, what's the most heartbreaking story from your love life?
My boyfriend and I broke up over religion. We were in a relationship for 4 years and a couple of months ago, both his parents, who are Jewish, and my parents, who are Hindu, made us break up with each other because both families believed that there was no future for both of us. His Jewish parents didn't want a Hindu daughter-in-law, and my parents felt the same about him. Although we had tried for the past 4 years to get our parents to accept the other, they never did, which always led to arguments. We continue to remain friends now, and it breaks my heart every time I see him because I still love him immensely.
Quick stories. Reddit, what's the most heartbreaking story from your love life?
I had a religion teacher in high school, and when he found out that I was an atheist, told me, I think because you're an atheist, you're going to have trouble finding a wife when you get older. Fast forward 4 years to now, and I met a girl while traveling who I really liked, but who straight up told me that she could never be with anyone who wasn't a devoted Christian like herself.
Quick stories. Women with strict parents, please tell me your life stories and adventures.
So when I lived with my parents and had a boyfriend, I could obviously never tell them the real reason I'm going out. So I convinced them I have a friend group at work that I used to meet frequently on weekends, even though we're not actually close at all, so that I can take their names when I'm going to meet my boyfriend. But my masterpiece of a lie is when I went to Pondicherry for a couple of days without telling them, when I was in college and staying in a hostel. I told them I was traveling for a site visit that the college was taking us for, but the site visit was actually a day before I left for my trip. My hostel roommate was nice enough to handle the warden for me, so she didn't call my parents. And when I was in Pondicherry, I sent my parents pictures of the site visit from 2 days ago as if I was there, and snuck back into hostel without the warden asking too many questions. It's been 3 years and they haven't found out, and I don't intend to tell them for a few more years.
Quick stories. Okay, you won't believe this story. Last night I was out drinking with friend Zay, and suddenly we decided to do something crazy. In our friend's room there was an old closet that no one had opened for 10 years. We thought it was perfect, a mystery for us, drunk as hell. It's decided, we started opening the closet. There was a lot of dust inside, but among the old things they found a letter written in 1980. It was something of a treasure in the archives of the past. The letter told about how 2 guys from our city hid their secret treasure in an old school that had long been closed. Mixed with emotions and alcohol, we decided to go in search of this treasure. So today we explored the abandoned school like real adventurers. Several hours of searching passed, and suddenly, in the basement, we found a hidden box. It was full of ancient coins, gems, and photos from the 80s. So yes, drinking can lead to incredible adventures and unexpected discoveries. So guys, drink up.
Quick stories. Several years have passed since the terrible event, but the nightmares still linger. It happened in a quiet village where life flowed smoothly and no one expected such a terrible story. On the outskirts, there was an abandoned house with an ominous reputation. They said that there once lived a family who dealt in darkness and magic. Legend has it that after a night of terrible screams, the house was left empty. We, a group of friends, decided to check how true this is. In the evening, in the dark, we came to the empty house with flashlights and cameras. It was cold and uncomfortable inside. The light from the lanterns created eerie shadows, and the wooden floors creaked as if the house was breathing. There were strange symbols hanging on the walls, and we began to photograph them. While we were exploring the house, Jake suddenly disappeared. Panic gripped us. His screams came from inside. We rushed to him and saw a terrible sight. Jake lay on the floor, scared and exhausted. Around him stood a figure dressed in black, with a hood and diamond eyes sparkling with madness. We managed to save Jake and get out of the house, but it cost us a lot. Jake lost his mind, and no one could understand what happened inside this ominous building. We told the police, but they found nothing but old things and shabby rooms. We never returned to that village and vowed never to seek adventure in mystical places again.
Quick stories. There was a Chinese place near our campus where everyone spoke Chinese, and although I also know Chinese, I always spoke to them in English because I am a little embarrassed by my accent. So, usually I take rice with meat from them, but this time I already had ready-made rice at home, so I decided to go purely for meat. I came in, placed an order without rice, and gave him money. Then I hear the cashier yelling in Chinese to the kitchen workers, "This fat ass will only have meat, no rice." I heard this very clearly and decided to add in Chinese, "That's right, I have plenty of rice at home." Since then they always give me a refill and, by the way, they didn't take a penny from me for that order.